You are here only to bear my heir. Duke Ethan Hawthorne's voice crossed the candlelit chapel with the cold precision of a blade laid carefully upon a table. Clara Bennett stood opposite him beneath the dark ribs of Blackthorne Castle's private sanctuary, her ivory gown borrowed from some forgotten bride, its sleeves slightly too long, and its lace carrying the faint scent of cedar and dust. Rain struck the stained glass windows in restless waves, and the flames along the stone walls trembled as though even they wished to retreat. No family waited in the pews. No music softened the silence. Only an elderly minister, Mrs. Margaret Collins, and two solemn witnesses watched Clara place her name beneath Ethan's on the marriage register. Her wrist still bore a pale mark where one of the Duke's men had gripped her too tightly while escorting her from her home, though she had refused to complain. Complaints belonged to those who expected mercy. Clara expected none. Ethan stood nearly a foot taller than she did, dressed in black from collar to boots, his broad shoulders rigid beneath his formal coat. His face was handsome in the severe manner of old portraits, but there was no warmth in it. His gray eyes held the exhausted watchfulness of a man who had not slept peacefully in years. Nothing more, he added. Clara lowered the pen. A single drop of ink spread across the page like a dark flower. She looked at him then, not at the title, not at the wealth surrounding him, but at the man who had purchased her obedience with her brother's freedom. Then you have married the wrong woman, Your Grace. The minister drew a sharp breath. One witness looked quickly toward the floor. Mrs. Collins remained still, but something almost like approval flickered in her eyes. Ethan's expression did not change, though a muscle tightened along his jaw. Your brother will be released at dawn, he said, provided you honor the agreement. I signed your agreement. Clara's voice remained quiet. Do not mistake that for surrender. For the first time, his gaze shifted. It fell to the silver pocket watch hanging from a narrow ribbon at her waist, the only possession of her father she had refused to sell. Something moved behind Ethan's composure, recognition, perhaps, or fear, but vanished before she could name it. He stepped forward and lifted the plain gold ring from the velvet cushion. His fingers were steady until they touched hers. Then they trembled. Clara felt it. So did he. He placed the ring upon her hand and immediately withdrew, as though contact had awakened some buried memory. By the authority entrusted to me, the minister began, his voice softened by the vast chapel, I declare you husband and wife. At that exact moment, the great clock in the western tower began to strike. Once, twice. The sound rolled through the castle like thunder trapped inside stone. Ethan went perfectly still. The third chime never came. His face drained of color, and the ring he had not yet returned to its box slipped from his hand, struck the floor, and spun in a bright circle between them. 2:17 in the morning. Clara watched his breath falter. She had seen men frightened by poverty, prison, and death. She had never seen a duke frightened by time. Ethan stared at the fallen ring as though it belonged to a grave. Then, from somewhere beyond the chapel doors, a woman screamed. The scream beyond the chapel doors ended as abruptly as it had begun. Ethan moved first, crossing the stone floor with such speed that his coat swept the candle flames behind him. Clara followed, gathering the borrowed skirt in one hand, while Mrs. Collins called for the guards. In the western corridor, they found a young maid trembling beside an open window. Rain had blown across the tiles, and a black raven beat its wings against the glass before vanishing into the storm. On the floor lay a folded message sealed with dark red wax. Ethan broke it open, read 3 lines, and closed his hand around the paper. What does it say? Clara asked. Nothing that concerns you. My brother is imprisoned under your authority. Everything in this house concerns me now. His gaze met hers, cold once more, yet the fear awakened by the clock had not entirely left his face. Return to your chamber. No, the single word echoed between them. 12 hours earlier, Clara had stood inside the county jail beneath a ceiling stained by years of winter damp. Noah Bennett sat across from her behind iron bars, thinner than he had been the week before, though he tried to smile. You should not have come, he said. You are my brother. That has never stopped you from making sensible decisions before. She reached through the bars and took his hand. His fingers were cold. They are moving you north at dawn. Noah's smile disappeared. The northern prison stood nearly 200 miles away, beyond roads that often closed beneath winter snow. Once transferred, He would vanish into a system built to forget men without money or titles. "Listen to me, Clara," he whispered. "I did not take the bonds. I found something in the estate accounts, payments hidden beneath false tenant names." Lady Victoria Hale's name appeared beside every transfer. A guard approached, and Noah slipped a torn, smoke-darkened page into Clara's palm. "Do not trust anyone from Blackthorne, not even the Duke." The warning had barely left his lips when the guard ended their visit. Outside, a black carriage waited beneath the rain. The hawthorn crest shone upon its door. Clara had expected a solicitor. Instead, Ethan sat inside, his face half hidden by shadow. "Your brother's future can still be altered," he said. "At what price?" "Marriage." The word had fallen between them without softness. By the time the carriage carried her away, Clara had seen Lady Victoria watching from an upper jail window, dressed in silver and smiling as though an old plan had finally begun. Now, in Blackthorne's corridor, Clara remembered that smile. Before Ethan could turn away, she seized the rain-damp message from his hand. 3 sentences crossed the page in elegant ink. "The prisoner will not survive the journey north. The girl has the ledger page. Complete the bargain before sunrise, or lose them both." Clara looked up slowly. "You knew?" Ethan's silence answered before his voice did. "I knew your brother had discovered something dangerous, and you let me believe he was guilty. I kept him where Victoria could not reach him. In a cell, alive." Clara unfolded the scorched page hidden inside her sleeve. At the sight of Lady Victoria's name, Ethan's composure fractured. Then footsteps sounded at the far end of the corridor, and Lady Victoria herself emerged from the darkness, dry despite the storm, wearing the same quiet smile Clara remembered from the jail. Lady Victoria Hale approached with the unhurried grace of a woman who had never been denied entry anywhere. Silver silk whispered across the wet stone, untouched by the rain that had entered through the open window, and a strand of pale hair rested perfectly against her cheek. Her gaze moved from Ethan to Clara, then settled upon the scorched page in Clara's hand. "How unfortunate," she said. "I had hoped that particular scrap had been lost." Clara folded the page once and held it against her palm. "You were at the jail. I visit many places. You watched me leave." Victoria smiled. "Curiosity is not a crime." Ethan stepped between them. "Return to your rooms, Victoria. In my family's house." Her eyes sharpened. "You forget that Blackthorne belonged to the Hales before your grandfather purchased their loyalty with a title. And you forget that I am still its master." For a moment, the corridors seemed to contract around them. Rain tapped the windows. Candle flames bent beneath a cold draft. Victoria lowered her gaze toward Clara's wedding ring. "So it is done." "It is," Ethan replied. "Then I suppose congratulations are required." She turned to Clara. "You must forgive the absence of flowers. The last bride who wore that gown preferred white roses." Clara felt the air leave her lungs. This gown belonged to someone else. Everything at Blackthorne belonged to someone else first. Ethan's voice hardened. "Enough." Victoria inclined her head, though triumph remained in her expression. "Of course. Dawn is approaching, and you have many duties to fulfill." She walked away without haste, disappearing beyond the curve of the corridor. Clara waited until the sound of her steps faded. What did she mean? "Nothing. You have used that word twice tonight, and both times it concealed a lie." Ethan looked toward the chapel doors, where the fallen ring still gleamed upon the floor. "Mrs. Collins will take you upstairs. I am not going anywhere until you tell me why Victoria knows about the agreement. Because every wall in this house has ears. And why this dress fits me." That stopped him. Clara saw it clearly, the brief tightening around his eyes, the hesitation of a man calculating how much truth he could afford. Mrs. Collins appeared beside them carrying a candle. "Your Grace," she said gently. "The lady should see her room." Ethan gave a single nod. "Lock the western passage." "Yes, Your Grace." Clara followed the housekeeper up a staircase of black oak worn smooth by generations. Portraits watched from the walls, their painted faces stern beneath layers of varnish. At the landing, Mrs. Collins opened a carved door. Warmth met Clara first, followed by the scent of lavender and cedar. The room had been prepared with unsettling precision. A wool robe lay across the bed. Slippers waited beside the hearth. A brush of dark polished wood rested upon the vanity. Even the gloves arranged near the window were her size. Clara turned slowly. How long have you been expecting me? Mrs. Collins did not answer. Her silence carried more weight than denial. Above the fireplace hung a portrait veiled in thin gray cloth. Clara crossed the room and pulled it aside. A young woman stared back from the canvas, dressed in the same ivory gown, her chestnut hair arranged in the same manner Clara's had been for the ceremony. The resemblance was not exact. It was worse than exact. It was familiar. Around the woman's neck hung a silver pocket watch identical to the one Clara had inherited from her father. Behind her, the door closed. Clara turned. Ethan stood there alone, his face pale in the firelight. His eyes were fixed upon the watch at her waist. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Clara covered it with her hand. "It belonged to my father." Ethan took one step closer, and for the first time that night, his voice lost all command. "No," he whispered. "It belonged to her." Clara's fingers closed around the silver watch until its edges pressed into her palm. "Her name," she said. "Tell me her name." Ethan remained near the door, the fire casting restless shadows across his face. For several seconds, he seemed unable to answer. "Elizabeth Bennet." The room went silent around them. Clara looked back at the portrait. "That was my mother's name." "I know." The admission struck harder than any accusation. She turned toward him slowly. "You knew who I was before tonight." Ethan's gaze fell to the floor. "I knew who your mother had been. I was not certain about you until I saw the watch. Yet the dress was prepared. The room was prepared. Even the gloves fit. Mrs. Collins worked from measurements provided by the seamstress in town. Without my knowledge. There was no safe way to ask." Clara gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "You found a safe way to arrange a marriage." Ethan accepted the rebuke without defense. Beyond the windows, thunder rolled over the hills surrounding Blackthorne. The castle stood nearly 20 miles from the nearest town, isolated by forest, stone walls, and roads already flooding beneath the storm. "Why is my mother's portrait here?" Clara asked. "She served as companion to my mother many years ago. She was educated, observant, and trusted more than most members of this family deserved." "Then why did she leave?" Ethan moved toward the fireplace, but stopped several feet from Clara, as though he understood that distance was the only courtesy she would accept. "She discovered irregularities in the estate accounts. Large payments disguised as tenant repairs. Properties transferred through false names. When she tried to bring the evidence to my father, she was accused of theft." Clara's breath caught. "The same accusation made against Noah." "Yes. And Victoria was involved." "I believe so. Belief is not proof. That is why I needed the ledger page." Clara held it more tightly. "You needed evidence, so you used my brother to draw me here. I placed Noah under guard after he found the records. Victoria's people were already watching him. You could have told us. And trusted a frightened young man to behave normally while assassins followed him." Ethan's voice sharpened, then softened at once. "I chose the method most likely to keep him alive. You chose control." He did not deny it. Clara turned to the portrait again. Her mother's painted eyes held a calm sorrow Clara remembered only in fragments. A hand smoothing her hair, a lullaby beside a winter window, the faint ticking of the silver watch at bedtime. Did she steal it? No. The watch belonged to my mother. She gave it to Elizabeth before sending her away. Ethan reached inside his coat and withdrew a small brass key. "There is something hidden within it." Clara examined the watch. Along its rim, nearly concealed beneath years of wear, was a narrow keyhole. "What does it open?" "My father's private archive. If your mother hid the original records there, they could prove everything." "Including Noah's innocence?" "Including that." Ethan placed the key upon the table between them rather than offering it directly. Clara studied him. "Why marry me?" Protection did not require vows. His face became unreadable again. "My father's will transfers control of Blackthorne to Victoria's son if I have no lawful heir by my 39th birthday." "When is that?" "Tomorrow." The tower clock shifted behind the walls with a deep mechanical groan. Clara looked toward the door. "Then your concern was never only my safety." "No." The honesty carried no comfort. "If Victoria gains the estate, she gains every archive, every witness, and every tenant whose livelihood depends upon this land. So one woman must be sacrificed to save thousands." Ethan's eyes met hers. "That is what I told myself." Clara crossed the room and tried the door. The handle did not move. She turned back. "You locked me in." Surprise flashed across his face. Ethan tested the handle himself. then struck the door once with his open palm. "Margaret." No answer came from the corridor. A faint scraping sounded near the floor. A folded letter slid beneath the door and stopped beside Clara's borrowed slippers. She opened it. The handwriting belonged to Noah. "Do not believe the Duke. He knows what happened to Mother." The candle nearest the door went out, and from behind the portrait came the unmistakable sound of someone breathing. The breathing behind the portrait stopped. Clara did not move. Ethan reached for the brass candlestick beside the bed, but she caught his wrist before he could lift it. "No sudden movement," she whispered. His eyes dropped to her hand, then returned to the darkened wall. For one suspended moment, neither of them breathed. A narrow seam appeared beside the portrait frame. The painted likeness of Elizabeth Bennet shifted outward with a low wooden groan, revealing a hidden passage no wider than a closet door. Mrs. Collins stepped through, one hand pressed to her chest, her face pale beneath the candle glow. "Forgive me," she said. "Lady Victoria has placed servants at both staircases. I could not reach you openly." Ethan lowered the candlestick. "Did you lock the door?" "No, Your Grace. Someone else did." Clara held up Noah's letter. "And this?" Mrs. Collins stared at the handwriting. "It was given to me by a stable boy 10 minutes ago. He claimed it came from the jail." "Noah would never write that sentence without explanation," Clara said. She unfolded the page and studied the slant of the ink. "The words are his, but the final line is not." Ethan moved closer. "How can you tell?" "My brother crosses the letter T from left to right. Whoever added the last sentence crossed it backward." Mrs. Collins looked toward the locked door. "Then someone wants you to distrust his grace." Clara turned to Ethan. "That does not make the accusation false." Pain flickered across his face, quickly hidden. "No." The simple answer unsettled her more than denial would have. Ethan took the key from the table and placed it beside the silver watch. "Open it." Clara inserted the key into the narrow rim. A soft click sounded, and the back of the watch released. Inside, beneath the familiar clockwork, lay a tiny disc of dark blue enamel engraved with the hawthorn crest. Around its edge were 4 words: "Truth waits behind mercy." "My mother used that phrase," Ethan said. His voice had changed. It carried none of the authority he had worn in the chapel. "She wrote it in letters after Elizabeth disappeared." Clara examined the disc. "You said my mother was sent away." "That is what I was told." "And what do you believe?" He looked at the portrait. "I believe my father ordered her silence. I believe Victoria helped him. I believe Elizabeth escaped Blackthorne with proof they could not find." "What happened to her afterward?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "She died 6 years later." "How?" "A fever, according to the county record." Clara studied him until the room seemed to narrow around them. "You do not believe that either." "No," the word came quietly. No command. No defense. Only grief. A heavy impact sounded against the locked door. Mrs. Collins stepped back into the passage. "We must leave now." Ethan held out the key to Clara. "The archive is below the west tower. This passage will take us within 50 feet of it." Clara did not take his hand. She took the key. "You will walk in front of me. You think I mean to trap you. I think you have already done so." He accepted that without protest and entered the passage first. The corridor beyond smelled of stone, dust, and rain carried through hidden cracks. Clara followed, lifting her skirt above the narrow steps. After several yards, Ethan stopped so suddenly that she nearly collided with him. "What is it?" A faint red glow trembled at the bottom of the stairway. Smoke curled upward through the darkness. Ethan turned, his face stripped of all restraint. The archive, somewhere below, would crack beneath rising heat. Clara looked at the enamel disc in her palm and understood the truth before he spoke it. Someone was destroying the evidence. The smoke thickened as Ethan descended the final steps, one arm raised to shield his face from the bitter air. Clara followed close behind, the enamel disc clenched in her hand, while Mrs. Collins remained above to watch the passage. The archive door stood open. Orange light moved across rows of shelves, but the fire had not yet reached the stone chamber itself. A pile of ledgers burned inside a metal basin near the center of the room, carefully contained, as though whoever had started it wanted destruction without alarm. Ethan crossed the chamber and pulled a heavy wool curtain from the wall. He threw it over the basin, smothering the flames beneath dark folds. Smoke curled around his shoulders. "Stay back," he said. "Do not order me now." Clara seized a second curtain and helped seal the edges until the glow disappeared. The room settled into darkness, broken only by a single lantern near the doorway. Ethan coughed once, then knelt beside the ruined books. "Copies," he said. "All of them. Then the originals are elsewhere." Clara opened her palm and studied the blue disc. "Truth waits behind mercy." The word mercy had been engraved more deeply than the others. She moved the lantern across the walls. Shelves. Stone. A narrow writing desk. Above it hung a carved wooden angel with both hands extended. One hand held a sword. The other held an open book. "Mercy does not carry a sword," Clara whispered. Ethan looked up. "What?" She approached the carving and pressed the book. A hidden catch released. The entire panel shifted forward, revealing a small iron compartment. Inside lay 3 leather-bound ledgers, a bundle of letters, and a sealed statement bearing Elizabeth Bennet's name. Clara's breath trembled. Ethan did not reach for any of it. "They belong to you," he said. "The truth belongs to whoever suffered for it." She opened the statement. Her mother's handwriting filled the first page, steady and precise. Elizabeth described false property transfers, missing tenant funds, and payments authorized by Lord Hawthorne and Victoria Hale. The final pages concerned Clara and Noah. If danger reached them, Elizabeth wrote, the evidence was to be used to clear the Bennet name and protect the children from retaliation. Clara lowered the paper. "You knew this existed. I knew your mother had hidden something. I did not know where. Yet you brought Noah into the estate offices." Ethan's silence answered her. Clara's eyes hardened. "You placed him there deliberately. I needed someone connected to Elizabeth who could recognize her records. So you used my brother. I hired him under another name to keep Victoria from noticing." She noticed. Yes. The admission carried quiet shame. Clara stepped closer, anger warming her voice. "And when he found the transfers, you had him arrested. I had him moved into a guarded cell because 2 attempts had already been made to remove him from the county. You made him believe he was abandoned. I made Victoria believe he had no value." Clara stared at Ethan, seeing not a monster, but something more dangerous, a man who believed protection excused deception. "You could have trusted us. Trust has buried everyone I ever loved." The words escaped him before he could stop them. The room changed. His hand tightened against the edge of the desk, and the cold authority vanished from his face. "My mother trusted my father. Elizabeth trusted this house. My wife trusted the physician Victoria recommended." Clara went still. "Your wife." Ethan looked toward the dead fire. "She did not die from weakness. The medicine given to her was altered. I learned that too late." The clock mechanism groaned somewhere above them. Time was moving toward dawn. Clara gathered the ledgers and letters. "Then Victoria feared every possible heir." "Yes." "Including the one you demanded from me." Ethan's eyes closed briefly. "Yes." Clara placed the evidence inside a leather case. "Then our marriage did not protect me. It marked me." A bell rang once from the upper corridor. Mrs. Collins appeared at the stairway, breathless. "Your Grace, the jail carriage has arrived at the east gate." Clara turned sharply. "Noah." Mrs. Collins shook her head. "The carriage is empty. On its seat, beneath the hawthorn crest, someone had left Noah's coat and a note addressed to Clara." Clara opened the note beneath the lantern at the east gate, while rain whispered across the carriage roof. The handwriting was not Noah's. "Bring the original ledgers to St. Mercy Chapel before dawn. Come without guards, or your brother will disappear where no Hawthorne title can reach him." Ethan read over her shoulder, his expression turning still in the way storms became still before breaking. "You are not going." Clara folded the note. "You no longer decide where I go. Victoria expects you to act from fear. She expects me to act alone." Clara looked toward the black road beyond the gates. "That is why I will not." Ethan studied her. "You have a plan. I have the truth, and she does not know how much of it we found." They returned to the library, where the first gray hint of morning pressed against the windows. Clara placed the 3 ledgers upon the desk and removed the scorched page from her sleeve. "We give her this one." Ethan frowned. "A fragment will not satisfy her. It will when she believes the rest burned." Mrs. Collins brought blank accounting books from the steward's office. Clara wrapped them in the leather case and placed the scorched page on top. From a distance, the bundle appeared convincing. Ethan watched her work with an expression she could not read. "Your mother would have understood strategy," he said. Clara tied the case shut. My mother understood what happened when powerful men kept secrets for someone else's protection. The word struck him. He did not look away. You are right. That does not repair what you did. No, you used Noah as bait. You allowed me to believe his life depended upon becoming your wife. You offered safety with one hand while removing my freedom with the other. Ethan reached into his coat and withdrew the marriage agreement. He placed it near the fire. Then let this be the first thing I return. Clara watched as he tore the document through the center. Once, then again. He fed the pieces into the flames until the ink curled into ash. The marriage remains lawful, she said. Only until you choose otherwise. At sunrise, my solicitor will prepare an annulment petition and a full pardon for Noah. You could have offered those before the chapel. His voice lowered. I was afraid that without the vows, you would leave before I could protect you. You were afraid I would choose. Ethan's eyes closed for one brief moment. Yes. Clara removed the gold ring from her finger and placed it on the desk between them. The small sound it made seemed louder than the storm. Then understand this. A prison does not become mercy because its walls are beautiful. He stared at the ring. I understand. A bell sounded from the courtyard. One of the stable hands entered, pale and breathless. Your Grace, a horse was found near the south road. It belongs to the jail escort. Ethan turned toward the window. How long to St. Mercy Chapel? 6 miles by the forest road, the man answered. Longer in this weather. Clara lifted the false ledger case. Then we leave now. Ethan reached for his coat. I will go with you. Victoria demanded that I come without guards. I am not a guard. Clara met his gaze. Tonight, you are not a husband either. Pain moved across his face, but he bowed his head. Then allow me to come as the man responsible for placing your brother in danger. Before Clara could answer, the library doors opened. Lady Victoria stood upon the threshold, holding Noah's silver spectacles between 2 gloved fingers. How touching, she said. But St. Mercy Chapel was never the meeting place. Behind her, the corridor lights went dark one by one. Your brother has been inside Blackthorne all night. Victoria's words settled over the library like frost. Clara held the false ledger case against her side, while Ethan moved half a step in front of her, not enough to command, only enough to shield. Where's Noah? Clara asked. Victoria turned the spectacles slowly between her fingers. Safe, for the moment. He has been kept in the old music room behind the East Gallery. Your loyal servants searched the roads while he remained 20 yards from this very door. Ethan's voice was quiet. You will release him. You still speak as though the house obeys you. Victoria glanced toward the dark corridor. By sunrise, the trustees will recognize my son as the next lawful master of Blackthorne. Your sudden marriage will be challenged, your bride discredited, and the Bennett evidence reduced to smoke. Clara looked at the spectacles. One lens carried a faint mark of blue chalk. Noah had used the same chalk when balancing accounts, leaving traces on his cuffs and fingertips. If he had been brought through the East Gallery, he would have marked whatever he could reach. You want the ledgers, Clara said. Place them on the desk, Victoria replied. Then take me to my brother. You are in no position to negotiate. Neither are you. Clara rested the case beside the torn marriage agreement. The original records contain more than payments. They contain letters in your hand. Victoria's smile weakened. A resemblance in penmanship proves little. A confession proves more. Ethan looked at Clara, understanding arriving in his eyes. She continued before Victoria could interrupt. Mrs. Collins sent a messenger to the county trustees before we left the archive. By now, men outside this family know the evidence exists. It was a gamble. Clara did not know whether Margaret had reached anyone. Victoria did not know that either. Silence sharpened between them. Then, faintly, 3 notes sounded from somewhere beyond the East Gallery. A piano. The same 3 notes repeated, uneven but deliberate. Clara's heart lifted. Noah was alive. He is signaling, she said. Victoria turned instinctively toward the sound. Ethan crossed the library and pulled the bell cord beside the fireplace. Nothing happened. The servants' bells have been cut, he said. Not all of them. Clara remembered the hidden passage and the inscription on the enamel disc. Truth waits behind mercy. St. Mercy had never meant the chapel outside the estate. It meant the carved angel in the archive, and perhaps more than one passage connected to it. She took the blue disc from her pocket and held it beneath the lantern. Tiny lines formed a map around the crest. One route ran from the archive to the East Gallery. Mrs. Collins, Clara called toward the wall behind Elizabeth's portrait. A panel opened almost immediately. Margaret stood there with two estate stewards and the county magistrate. Victoria's face lost its composure. "You invited him here?" Ethan asked. "Your mother taught me that powerful families should never investigate themselves," Margaret replied. The magistrate entered and bowed to Clara. "Mrs. Bennet, we received copies of 3 pages before the storm worsened. They are sufficient to reopen your brother's case and suspend all transfers of Hawthorne property." Victoria stepped backward. "Copies?" Clara met her gaze. "You were so certain we would guard the originals that you never considered we might share the truth." Another 3 notes sounded from the piano. One steward hurried toward the East Gallery. Moments later, Noah appeared at the library door, pale and exhausted, but standing on his own. Clara crossed the room and embraced him. "I knew you would read the chalk," he whispered. Behind them, Victoria's voice became sharp. "Ethan, your wife has destroyed everything your name was built to protect." Ethan looked at Clara, then at the ledgers, then at the ring resting alone upon the desk. "No," he said. "She has saved the only part of it worth keeping." Victoria reached for the leather case, but the magistrate calmly stepped between them. Ethan moved beside Clara as Noah was led to a chair. For the first time, he did not stand above her or before her. He stood at her side. Then Victoria laughed softly. "You believe this ends at sunrise?" She looked toward Ethan with chilling certainty. "Ask him what happened to his first wife after she discovered the same accounts." Clara turned. Ethan's face went white. Victoria's smile returned. "Tell her who signed the order that kept the physicians silent." Victoria's accusation remained in the library after every other sound had faded. Clara looked at Ethan. He did not defend himself. The magistrate waited beside the desk. Noah sat beneath Mrs. Collins's watchful care, and beyond the rain-streaked windows, the darkness had begun to thin. "Tell me," Clara said. Ethan's eyes lowered to the ring he had given her only hours before. "The physician came to me 3 days after my wife died. He said her medicine had been changed. He feared Victoria, and he feared my father's name even more." "What did you do?" Ethan drew a slow breath. "I signed an order sending him away under protection." Victoria laughed. "Protection. Such a noble word." Ethan continued without looking at her. "The order also required his silence until I had proof. I believed secrecy would keep him alive." "And did it?" Clara asked. His face answered first. "No." His carriage vanished before he reached the coast. The truth settled heavily between them. Ethan had not caused the physician's death, but he had chosen silence. Again, he had hidden danger behind locked doors and called it mercy. Clara understood now why guilt followed him through every room of Blackthorne. Victoria lifted her chin. "He buried the truth to preserve his title." "I buried it because I was afraid," Ethan said. His voice broke on the final word. "Afraid of scandal. Afraid of losing the estate. Afraid that if the truth became public, everything my family had built would collapse." He turned to the magistrate. "Record my confession. Every letter, every order, every account will be surrendered. Blackthorne will answer for what was done here, even if the title does not survive it." Victoria's expression finally changed. "You would destroy your own name for her?" Ethan looked at Clara. "No, I would stop destroying others to preserve it." The magistrate instructed the stewards to escort Victoria from the room. She left without another word, though her silence no longer carried power. When the doors closed, the first light of dawn touched the windows. Noah rose and placed the scorched ledger page beside the originals. "My name will be cleared before noon," the magistrate promised, "and every charge formally withdrawn." Clara embraced her brother, then watched Mrs. Collins lead him toward a quiet room where he could rest. When they were alone, Ethan removed 3 documents from the desk drawer. "I prepared these before the ceremony," he said. "A pardon for Noah, the deed to your family home, and an annulment petition bearing my signature." Clara stared at him. "You could have freed him without marrying me." "Yes." The word was almost inaudible. "Then why did you not?" Ethan's hands trembled as he placed the papers before her. "Because I told myself the marriage would protect you. Because I needed an heir to keep Victoria from taking Blackthorne. Because I was too frightened to ask for your trust and too accustomed to using authority instead." Clara picked up the annulment. "And now the choice is yours." She walked toward the door. Ethan followed, though each step seemed to cost him. At the top of the stone staircase, dawn poured through the tall eastern windows, turning the cold walls pale gold. Clara reached the first step before his voice stopped her. "Please." She turned. Ethan Hawthorne, Duke of Blackthorne, sank to one knee. There was no audience now. No minister. No contract. Only a broken man beneath the morning light. Tears moved silently down his face. "I asked you to carry my future because I believed my name mattered more than your freedom," he said. "Before dawn, you saved my brother's tenants, my mother's honor, and the truth I was too afraid to face. I will not ask you to remain as my wife. I ask only for the chance to become a man who would deserve to stand beside you." Clara looked at the annulment in her hand, then at the ring still lying far behind them in the library. She did not promise forgiveness. She did not offer love. Instead, she reached down and placed her hand over his trembling fingers. "Then rise, Ethan," she said softly, "and begin with no more secrets." He stood, not as a duke reclaiming authority, but as a man accepting judgment. Together, they faced the sunrise. Love had not begun when he claimed her future. It began when he finally returned it to her.